His name was Don Carlos. He died in a stone cell beneath the Alcazar of Madrid. The year was 1568, and his own father put him there to rot. When the guards opened the door, they recoiled. The stench hit first rank, metallic, sweet with decay. His skin was blistered, pale, almost translucent. His fingernails were torn, blood crusted beneath them. He'd tried to claw through the walls, tried to climb out of a place no light touched. The prince hadn't bathed in months, feces mixed with dried vomit in the straw. His ankles were raw from chains, his ribs sharp as knives. One eye was swollen shut, the other stared, lifeless, but wide open. They said he starved himself. Others said he was poisoned, but someone had locked the door, someone had thrown away the key, and someone made sure no one ever heard his screams. He spoke to ghosts near the end, cried out for his mother, begged for water, laughed at the rats, and in his final days, he whispered secrets, names, places, betrayals, as if he knew they were still listening. His father, King Philip II, claimed it was mercy, but mercy doesn't chain your son in the dark. Mercy doesn't bleed you slow, bone by bone. They erased his name from prayer, burned his letters, closed the file. But they missed something, something still buried, something still breathing. And now we're going to open that door. A torch flickers in the long corridor of the Alcazar. Stone walls swallow its light. At the far end, a heavy door stands shut behind it. A boy's fate is sealed. Don Carlos emerges into the half-light of memory. He was once elegant in velvet and gold, the Prince of Asturias, the future of Spain. In this moment, though, he lives only in Flicker's eyes burning, nostrils flared, skin pale and taut. His jaw works without sound. He breathes with effort. Inside his private chamber, every object seemed to rebuke him. A cracked mirror reflected the hollow temple of his skull. A velvet cushion sagged, stained dark. The air smelled sour, of damp linen and sweat, and something deeper guilt, fear. Carlos paced, restless. His slender hands drummed the wooden table, leaving faint lines in the dust. He chewed his lip until it bled and tasted copper on his tongue. A faint tapping came from outside footsteps of attendants who no longer dared meet his gaze. His reflection held him prisoner longer than his father's guards. He studied the young man. He saw high cheekbones streaked with dried tears, eyes haunted by dreams he dared not speak aloud. He pressed his palm to the cool glass, as if he could escape into it. The room held an oppressive quiet until a distant echo shattered the stillness. The rasp of the door opening, a step, then the quiet thud of footsteps retreating. No questions asked, no mercy offered. Outside, courtiers whispered. Rumors clung to the murmur like cobwebs. Some claimed he had drawn lists naming supposed traitors. Others hinted at letters forged by his hand, plotting rebellion in the Low Countries. A few spoke of a poisoning slow, deliberate or a secret substitution so that the real prince might live elsewhere. Carlos felt every whisper as a blade. He slumped into a chair, his breathing shortened, a splintered chair leg pressed into his thigh. He ignored the pain. Instead, he pressed his fingers into his temples, attempting to still the storm inside. Shadows crept across the tapestry that depicted Spain's conquest of Flanders. Carlos's gaze found one corner, a lone figure kneeling, head bowed. He imagined himself there a subject, not a prince stripped of rank. Cast out. He blinked until tears fell, each a map of betrayal. He had begged for mercy. He had summoned his uncle, Juan of Austria, asking for ships and escape. He offered himself to his father, down on his knees, promising obedience. Instead, he had been stripped of sharp utensils, knives, forks. Even pens were removed from his reach. A warder confiscated his dagger the night he threatened his uncle with it, hands shaking. Now he sat at a wooden desk littered with seized letters, his plans, his debts, his fear all exposed in ink. Among them, scribbled in haste, was a single line, "They will kill me if I stay silent." He found solace in the lightest of touches, a quill, rough between his fingers, a scrap of parchment. He wrote small squares of prayer, scribbled lines of regret, refusal, longing. He folded them and tucked them beneath stones in the hearth, hoping someone unseen might find them. At night, the hearth's flames died. Carlos lay on tattered straw within a case of cold stones. His body trembled. He heard his own breath rasp like a death rattle. His ribs itched under ragged shirt. Rotten straw cut into his back when he shifted, trying to sleep. The granite floor held its chill in his bones. In his mind, he drifted between two places, the court's grand halls and this cage of silence. One moment he heard laughter, distant music in marble corridors. The next, rats scurry in the shadows, eyes glinting, jaws snapping at crumbs he could no longer spare. He thought of Isabella, his betrothed, now his father's wife. He dreamt of riding side by side through Flanders, emerging on the wind like new sovereigns. In sleep, he called her name softly. When morning came, all he felt was emptiness and the taste of dust. He imagined poisoning, a colored water, a sweet taste that turned lethal. He pictured doctors whispering Mendoza among them, offering reluctant balm, a drop of lavender oil under the tongue, a touch behind the ear. They dared not do more. They were forbidden. He exhaled with despair. His body succumbed slowly. Bruises bloomed beneath skin. Ligature marks circled his wrists, not new, but deepening, graying. Fever gripped him at night. He shivered violently beneath threadbare linen, his jaw locking in delirium. Still he held to memory the day he gifted oranges in the courtyard. He felt the sunshine on his face as children scattered in laughter. That memory was crisp, alive. It burned behind his eyelids. A promise of kindness he feared was lost. In those hours between midnight and dawn, he whispered names, places, warnings, a prophecy, a confession. He wasn't certain, but he sounded content, as though speaking into a void only he could fill. A single guard, Anna, lingered outside. She paused at the iron bars, caught his tremor mid-breath. She brought water, a chunk of stale cheese, warmth in a world turned frigid. Carlos's gaze found hers once steady. Trembling, and he murmured the one question that bounded from his lips, "Do they remember me?" Anna's eyes glistened. She nodded once. That nod was everything. And he survived one more dawn, waiting for a verdict never delivered. The air in the royal chambers grew colder as Carlos aged, not from winter, but from silence. At 16, his presence in court became a storm cloud. When he entered a room, conversations died, servants froze mid-step. Even seasoned nobles turned their eyes to the floor. His gait had become uneven, his gestures abrupt. One moment, he'd reach for your hand with warmth. The next, he'd slam a chalice to the ground, shards skittering across mosaic tile like teeth. Behind closed doors, he tore tapestries from the walls. He struck his tutor with an inkpot. He smashed a lute with such violence that splinters embedded in his palm. Blood dripped from his knuckles. He didn't flinch. Whispers multiplied. They said he slept with knives, that he scribbled strange diagrams late into the night, muttering in Latin. One page, retrieved from under his bed, showed a map of the Low Countries drawn not in ink, but with soot and blood, circles, arrows, names crossed out. They feared he would take the throne and bring ruin, but fear was not new in the Spanish court. What chilled them was how often he smiled when he should have wept. At public events, Carlos wore crimson, always too much. He stood still while choirs sang, but his hands trembled under velvet gloves when he bowed before his father. It was not out of reverence but necessity. King Philip's gaze was iron, flat, cold. He never touched his son. He never spoke Carlos's name in private, once, during a dinner. Carlos knocked over a candle holder, nearly setting the tablecloth ablaze. The king did not raise his voice. He simply turned to the Duke of Alba and said, "It will be soon." Carlos felt it, the tightening. He began to dream of escape. He wrote to governors in Flanders, promised loyalty, promised fire. He demanded troops. He planned to sail north and crown himself among rebels. His letters leaked. Some say a servant betrayed him. Others suspect the king read them before the wax seals dried. One night, Carlos appeared in the royal chapel, alone, shirt untucked, breath sour with wine. He stood at the altar, swaying. "I am the sun," he he shouted, voice echoing through vaulted stone, and the sun shall rise again. He laughed. He wept. He called his father a tyrant in the house of God. That night, the decision was made. He awoke the next morning in a chamber stripped bare, no attendants, no fresh linen. The windows shuttered. His breakfast did not arrive. Instead, silence came. Then the sound of boots, measured, heavy. He stood as the door opened. In the frame stood the Duke of Alba. Behind him, 6 guards in full armor. No words exchanged, only the sound of chains. Carlos took a step back, then another. His heel struck the edge of his writing desk. They lunged. He fought, fists flailing, a lamp shattered, oil splashed the walls. A curtain caught fire for a second before a guard stamped it out. Carlos screamed not words, but fury, animal, raw, a cry from someplace deeper than language. They struck him, a blow to the stomach, another to the shoulder. He buckled. Then silence. They carried him out like a corpse, down halls he had once ruled, past tapestries of saints and conquests. His blood left drops on the marble. Through the corridors, past the queen's chambers, down the spiral stairs beneath the Alcazar. To the stones that did not echo, to a door with no keyhole. The cell was small, damp, the only furniture, a wooden plank nailed into the wall. The Duke looked him in the eyes and said nothing. The door closed. A bolt slid into place. Darkness swallowed the boy. Above him, the court continued, dinners, sermons, decrees. None mentioned his name again. In whispers, servants spoke of the prince's fall. Some said he'd attempted to poison the king. Others swore he'd tried to flee disguised as a monk. The bravest among them whispered a darker tale that Don Carlos had never been mad, only inconvenient. But in the halls of power, no one asked questions. Because in Spain, only one man ruled, and that man had buried his son alive. The stone door groaned shut behind him. The clang of the bolt echoed like a death sentence. Darkness took over dense, absolute. Don Carlos blinked, but his eyes found no shapes, no outlines, only the void, the silence, and the cold. He reached out instinctively. His fingers met the roughness of damp stone, the chill biting into his skin like teeth. He traced the wall, moving sideways, until his knees struck the wooden plank meant to serve as his bed. It had no blanket, no straw, just splinters and mold. His breath came in bursts now, shallow, hot against the icy air. He sat down, slowly, like someone learning to move again. The weight of the iron on his ankles was sudden, unnatural. The shackle clinked as he shifted, a reminder that movement was no longer freedom, but permission. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time lost its meaning inside the cell. The torches outside flickered inconsistently, casting faint glimmers beneath the threshold. He studied that strip of light like a prisoner studies the sun through a keyhole. But the light never reached him. It never would. The first night, he didn't sleep. The cold pressed into his bones. His muscles locked. His jaw ached from clenching. He heard whispers through the walls, real or imagined. He couldn't say. Footsteps came and went above, muffled by layers of stone. Once, a distant scream rose from another chamber, shrill and broken, then was gone. He curled into himself, arms around knees, rocking gently like a child. He whispered names into the dark. Isabella, Maria, Alba, God. He repeated them like charms, desperate for any one of them to answer. But none did. By the third day, hunger took shape. Not just an emptiness, but a gnawing creature inside him. It clawed at his ribs. His throat dried until it cracked. His lips split, bled. When the slot in the door finally opened, he staggered forward, hands out like a beggar. A crust of bread dropped to the floor, hard, green in the corners. A tin bowl of water followed, splashing as it landed. He fell to his knees and ate in silence. No voices spoke to him. No questions were asked. It wasn't punishment. It was erasure. His body changed faster than he expected. Weight fell off him like dead leaves. His skin clung to the ridges of his bones. Every joint ached. His hands trembled constantly now, even at rest. The sores began around his ankles where the shackles rubbed, then his wrists, then his spine. They bled, then festered. The smell grew strong. He pressed cloth against them, tearing pieces from his tunic. The blood soaked through anyway. He kept talking, not to anyone, but to the air. He whispered phrases in Latin, sang hymns from his childhood. He recited the names of saints, his tutors, the court ministers. Sometimes he cursed them. Sometimes he asked them to forgive him. When no one came, he began to imagine faces in the dark. His mother. She stood before him in a pale dress, hands outstretched. She smiled, always on the edge of vanishing. Isabella appeared behind her, veiled in mourning. She never spoke. She only wept. The hardest to see was his father. Philip? The king arrived without expression, his face lit only by the torchlight in Carlos's dreams. He did not speak, either, but his eyes said, "Everything you did this to yourself." Carlos screamed at him, clawed the walls, tore at his own hair, but the king never replied. In his worst moments, Carlos believed he had already died, that this cell was purgatory, that he would wake one day and find himself judged not by God, but by history, and history would not be kind. He kept marks on the wall with a stone, one for each day. After a while, he lost count. The scratches blurred, blood from his fingers mixed into the marks. They stopped looking like dazes and began to look like wounds. The guards spoke about him in whispers when they thought he was asleep. Still breathing. One said, "Barely," said another. "He smiles at nothing. He sings to rats. He's gone." But Carlos was not gone, not yet. One evening, he heard a sound that didn't belong, the creak of the iron latch, slower, softer than usual. He stood, weak and swaying. A figure stepped in, slim, hooded, holding a tray. It was Anna. She didn't speak. She placed the food gently, not the usual scraps, but a real loaf and a wedge of cheese. She glanced at him just once. Her eyes shimmered in the dark. A moment passed. He managed a smile, crooked, faint, human. Then she was gone. And Carlos, once prince of the richest empire on earth, sat in the filth of a forgotten dungeon, clutching bread to his chest like treasure, whispering, "I am still here." Outside the door, the torches burned on. But the light had already left his eyes. By the third week, the cell began to breathe, not with air, but with moisture. The stone walls wept. Beads of water formed in the crevices like cold sweat. At night, the ceiling dripped, slow and rhythmic, as if the fortress itself mourned the boy buried within it. Carlos no longer stood when the slot opened. He listened. If the tray clinked against the floor, it meant the guards hadn't spat into it. If it didn't, he waited. Rats came first. They moved with no fear, claiming the crumbs before the prince could raise his head. He no longer fought them. He watched. One night, hunger won. He struck one with the heel of his boot, trembling, then bit into it raw. He gagged, but he swallowed. Shame didn't burn anymore, only the acid in his gut did. His fingernails blackened, his gums bled. His hair came out in clumps. He caught strands between his fingers and stared at them in the torchlight, watching how they curled like threads of night. Then, he tucked them beneath the stone slab he used as a pillow, a funeral for pieces of himself. Sleep came in fragments. Dreams were sharp, voices too real, at times. He would awaken convinced he'd spoken aloud, holding conversations with long-dead ancestors. He once claimed he saw Charles V, his grandfather, kneeling beside him, whispering battle plans in his ear. His laughter had changed. It wasn't human anymore. The guards refused to meet his gaze now. They passed messages behind their teeth, exchanging looks rather than words. He's cursed. He's whispering in tongues. He knows things. One of them, a younger man, swore Carlos had spoken his mother's name. The guard hadn't shared it, but when Carlos repeated it perfectly, the boy fled and never returned. The chains at his ankles grew slick with infection. Pus leaked down his legs, mixing with urine and blood. The stink of decay clung to him like wet cloth. He no longer tried to clean himself. He had no rags, no water, no reason. He began to sing soft, broken lullabies from childhood, a chant from his coronation rehearsal, then a single word, repeated endlessly in a whisper, libre, free. He scrawled it on the wall with bone. His own snapped from a chicken leg left too long to rot. He dipped it in blood from his cracked heel and etched letters into the stone. The word bled with him. On one of the worst days. A voice came, not from the wall, not from his skull, a real voice. Mendoza. The doctor entered, carrying a small oil lamp that trembled in his grip. He wore gloves, a cloth over his mouth. He did not speak right away. Carlos looked at him. His face was a hollow moon, eyes sunken, lips gray. "Am I mad?" the prince asked. Barely a sound. And Mendoza knelt slowly. He examined the wounds with 2 fingers. No tools, no bandages, only observation. Then he leaned close and whispered, "You remember too much." Carlos blinked. A tear rolled down the ridge of his cheek, tracing the line of a new scar. Mendoza placed a drop of lavender oil on the prince's collar. That was all he was allowed to do. He lingered a moment longer, then rose and left without a word. The scent remained. Carlos held it in his lungs like it was the breath of heaven. That night, Anna returned. She didn't bring food. She brought a candle. It was forbidden. If they'd caught her, she would have been whipped or worse. But she placed it carefully in the corner, shielded from view, and struck the flint with shaking hands until a flame rose. Carlos flinched. His eyes hadn't seen fire in weeks. The light revealed him. What once was a prince had become a relic, skin mottled, lips scabbed, his collarbone jutted like a blade, but those eyes still held fury. Anna didn't speak. She held out a cloth and gently wiped his face. Each stroke slow, tender. Carlos didn't cry, but he closed his eyes, leaned into the touch like it was the last warmth in the world. When she left, she whispered one word, resist. The door closed. He sat in the half-light, breathing the scent of lavender and wax. He stared at the candle until it flickered out. The nights grew longer, or maybe Carlos had simply forgotten how to count them. Inside the stone cocoon that held him, the air thickened, pressed closer, and began to hum. He couldn't tell where the walls ended and his skin began. Pain no longer came in stabs or shocks. It was a fog, a low, constant vibration under his bones. And yet he clung to the smallest signals of life. The smell of burnt tallow from a torch outside, the rustle of Anna's linen skirt as she passed, the sudden warmth of a cloth dipped in water. He memorized every detail. It was all he had left. One evening, just before the slot opened, he heard singing. Faint, off-key, a lullaby. Anna, she wasn't allowed to speak, but she sang softly, like a mother to a child, already halfway to sleep. Carlos pressed his ear to the stone and let the notes pass through him like wind in a forgotten room. That night, he dreamt of sunlight. Not heaven, not salvation, just a courtyard in spring, orange trees, the breeze of Seville. He saw himself standing at a balcony, a basket of fruit in hand, laughing. Below, children played. He tossed an orange, and they scrambled, giggling. One small boy looked up and waved. Carlos remembered waving back. The memory returned with such force, he awoke gasping. He began to whisper the word orange. He whispered it until it lost all meaning. The next time Anna came, he told her, "I gave them oranges once." She stopped, looked at him. In the courtyard. She nodded slowly, then smiled not with joy, but sorrow, a smile meant for ghosts. She left a peach with the bread that day, bruised, soft, but its sweetness broke his tongue open like a prayer. Carlos pressed his fingers into its flesh, letting the juice run through his hands. He didn't eat it right away. He held it, watched how the light clung to its skin, smelled it like a blind man remembering the color gold. He wept, not from pain, from memory. It reminded him that he had once been alive. The next few days brought silence, no food, no Anna, no guards. The hunger returned. His breath grew ragged. A wheeze settled in his chest like a dying animal. He coughed until his ribs burned and spat blood onto the floor. The blood was dark thick, clotting. He smeared it with his foot into the shape of a circle. Then he laughed. "I've made a son," he said aloud, and waited for someone to answer. No one did. Then, on the fifth night, a miracle. The door opened. Fully, not the slot, not the whisper. The door. He blinked against the sudden light. Mendoza stepped inside. Not as a doctor now, as a man. His face was pale, his eyes heavy. He held no tools, only a flask and a cloth. Carlos tried to sit up, failed. His arms buckled beneath him. Mendoza knelt. He said nothing for a long time. Then, "You were not wrong." Carlos blinked. About what? About them. The words were water to the prince. He let them soak in. He didn't understand them fully, but he needed them. Mendoza poured a few drops of clear liquid into Carlos's mouth. It burned slightly, then faded. Not poison. Mercy. Carlos looked at him. "They'll kill you for this." Mendoza stood. "They've already killed me, long ago." He left the cloth and the flask, and then he too vanished. Carlos stayed awake that night. He watched the flame in his mind, the one Anna had once lit. He heard the song she sang, and in that darkness, he was no longer alone. The pain didn't leave him, the fever didn't break, but something changed. He stopped screaming. He stopped fighting the rats. He began to speak again, not to the walls, but to the flame inside his chest. He told stories. He recited the names of the men who betrayed him, slowly, like prayers. He whispered his mother's lullaby to the rats and to the mold. He carved another word into the wall beside Libre. Remember, he carved it with his nail until the skin peeled and his hand bled again. Then he lay down. The stone was colder than ever. But he smiled. For a moment, he remembered what oranges smelled like. In the end, he stopped marking the walls. Not from despair, but from weakness. His fingers could no longer press with purpose. His arms quivered under their own weight. Even the rats began to pass him by, not with fear, but indifference. He had become a fixture in the room, a figure of stone and bone, no more threatening than the mold on the wall. His breath came in soft bursts now, more whisper than air, each one a test, as though his lungs were deciding whether to rise again or surrender. He watched the dust drift in a single beam of light that slipped under the door at dawn. That thin line was his only proof that the world still turned. That morning still existed beyond these walls. Carlos no longer cried. Tears required energy. And grief he had long since exhausted. What remained was something colder. He had stopped waiting for food, stopped flinching when footsteps passed. He had even stopped speaking not because he'd gone mad, but because he had no audience left. Not even God answered. Then quietly, like a ripple on still water, came the presence. He didn't hear the door open. He didn't see the guards. He simply felt it, the shift in air, the shadow. And then, Philip, King of Spain, master of empires. Father, he stood in the doorway. No guards flanked him, no priests, just the man who had signed the order, a silhouette cut in stone. Carlos did not rise. He couldn't. Their eyes met, across the damp silence. For the first time in months, the prince's lips moved. "You came," he whispered. Philip did not answer. He took 2 steps forward. Stopped. Carlos blinked. His vision blurred. He tried to lift his hand, failed. "I dreamed of fire," Carlos said, "of oceans, of my mother." The king's face remained unreadable. Carlos smiled faintly, not with mockery, but with a kind of relief. "Am I still yours?" he asked. Philip's expression didn't change. He looked down, then turned. He walked away without a word. The torchlight vanished behind the closing door. And Carlos was alone again, but not untouched. That night, his fever broke, not in healing, but in finality. Sweat poured from his body, his limbs stiffened, his breath rattled in his throat like a chain being dragged. Anna came. She wasn't supposed to, not anymore. She slipped in when the guards changed. Her eyes widened when she saw him. He looked less like a boy now, and more like something made of glass, fragile, pale, cracking under the weight of silence. She knelt beside him. He opened one eye. His voice was dry wind. "Will they remember?" Anna held his hand. They will. He nodded. Then, with effort, he whispered, I was kind once. You still are, she said. His lips moved again. No sound. Just breath. Then nothing. No cry. No final scream. Just stillness. She remained. Long after his chest stopped rising, she brushed his hair back with trembling fingers, closed his eyes, and kissed his temple. The guards found her there, hours later. They did not drag her away. They let her sit. As the body cooled, the next morning, a cart rolled out of the Alcazar. No procession, no fanfare. Inside lay what was left of a prince. No one spoke his name in court again. The cell was sealed, and time moved on. But in the memory of one girl, in the smell of a single peach, in the sound of a lullaby hummed at dusk, the boy who once gave oranges to children in the courtyard remained. Somewhere beneath the stone, his last whisper still lingers. And if you listen carefully, you might hear it too. They buried him without hymns. No bells rang from the cathedral. No black drapery hung from the palace gates. The name Don Carlos was whispered once, then vanished from the marble corridors of Madrid like dust swept beneath the throne. Officially, he died of natural causes, fever, weakness, a soul too fragile for power. But inside the stone belly of the Alcazar, the truth lingered in silence, in claw marks on the walls, in the blood-dark circle scrawled onto the floor, in the hollow where his body once lay, curled into itself like a question left unanswered. The cell was sealed. A wooden cross was never carved. No monument raised. No story told. Just a fading memory passed from servant to servant, carried like a secret in the folds of their silence. A memory of a prince who smiled at children, who sang to ghosts, who starved slowly beneath the feet of his father's empire. And outside, life continued. Philip ruled on. Wars were fought, treaties signed, kingdoms conquered. The sun never set on Spain. But deep beneath its most sacred palace, something remained. Not vengeance, not justice, only a question. Did anyone look back? Did anyone stop just once and wonder what it cost to silence a son? Some say, if you walk the halls of the old Alcazar at dusk, when the shadows stretch long and the candles flicker low, you might hear it. A single breath. A boy's voice. Not screaming. Not begging. Just asking, was I ever real? And no one answers. Only the stones remember.